Welcome to HFY Beyond Terra, where humanity doesn't just survive, it becomes the galaxy's biggest surprise. Subscribe, and let's go beyond Terra.
The summons arrived the way royal summons always do in stories. Sealed, formal, and delivered by someone who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. In real life, it came through the Veterans Network on a rainy Tuesday, buried between a reminder to update my medical certifications and a message from an old squadmate asking if I'd finally stopped waking up at 2 in the morning to check for the taste of smoke. Priority off-world invitation recipient. Human veteran identity VERIFIED request appear in person. No escort required. Issued by the throne of Akir. Akir. The name still carried a sound in my head like a blade being drawn slowly, deliberately, just to make sure you heard it. They'd been our enemies, then our uneasy ceasefire partners, then a political headache everyone pretended was someone else's problem. And now their throne wanted me. I read the final line 3 times before it sank in. Reason, debt, ACKNOWLEDGMENT. I stared at that word, debt, as if it might change under the pressure. I had no business being on a royal ledger. I wasn't a diplomat. I wasn't a hero, despite what the few surviving news clips liked to call me when they needed a face. I was a former field medic who done what medics do, try to keep people breathing long enough to reach somewhere safer. I opened a drawer, found the old unit patch, rubbed the worn thread between my fingers, and thought about the canyon. Thought about fire pouring from a torn shuttle hull. Thought about armor painted with symbols I hadn't understood then but couldn't forget now. And most of all, I thought about the eyes behind a cracked visor, wide with pain and furious with the indignity of it, refusing to beg even as blood slicked the metal around her collar. I hadn't seen that face in years. But the invitation felt like the past reaching up through the floor and grabbing my ankle, so I went. The transport wasn't ours. Akir didn't allow human vessels to land in their inner territories, not yet. Not after the war, not after what both sides had done. The ship that met me in orbit was slender and quiet, its lines more like a predatory bird than anything built for comfort. They didn't chain me. They didn't even search me with the aggression I expected. Instead, a security officer scanned my bag, nodded once, and returned it like I'd left it at a coat check. "Your compliance is noted," the officer said in careful, accented common. It wasn't kindness. It was control expressed politely. I spent the flight staring out at a planet that looked almost gentle from space, blue swaths of ocean, pale cloud spirals, continents with green veins and rust-colored ridges. Beauty could be convincing from a distance. On the ground, beauty sharpened into something else. When we pierced atmosphere, the ship hummed with a vibration that threaded through my bones. The cabin lights dimmed, and a faint scent, like crushed herbs and cold stones, slipped through the vents. Akir air filtered and curated. My hands were steady until the landing gear engaged. Then, without permission, my fingers tightened around the armrest. Memory wasn't visual the way people thought. It wasn't a neat picture you could hang on a wall and walk away from. It was weight and temperature and the certainty of pain returning to the same place every time the wind shifted. The hatch opened. Heat rolled in first, dry and bright. Then sound, distant bells, low voices, the layered hush of a place where power lived and everyone nearby adjusted their breathing accordingly. I stepped onto a landing platform of black stone that reflected sunlight like water. Beyond it rose the palace, towers and bridges and terraces carved into a cliff face, as if someone had convinced the mountain to wear jewelry. A line of attendants waited. Some wore ceremonial sashes, others wore the kind of armor designed to be invisible until it was. One of them stepped forward. "You are the human called?" "My name's not the important part," I said, surprising myself with how flat my voice sounded. The attendant blinked, then inclined his head as if I'd said something profound. "Then follow. The throne receives you." No mention of why. No explanation for how a former combat medic ended up worth this ceremony. Just the implication that answers were a privilege and I'd earn them by walking where I was told. We moved through corridors cooled by hidden channels of running water. Light spilled from high windows in thin, angled bands. The walls weren't decorated the way human palaces were. No portraits, no marble gods, no bragging about lineage with paint and gold. Instead, there were patterns carved into the stone, tight spirals and broken lines that made my eyes want to follow them. They felt less like art and more like language, like history recorded in a code meant to be read by those born to it. And everywhere the same scent, herbs, stone, and something faintly metallic beneath it, like the air remembered blood. I wondered how many of them had walked these halls thinking about humans the way I'd grown up thinking about Akir. Faceless, monstrous, conveniently simple. We reached a set of doors taller than my house back on Earth. The attendant touched a panel. The doors parted soundlessly. Beyond them waited a chamber shaped like a half-open hand. Sunlight poured through a glass canopy overhead, refracting into pale blues and silvers. The floor was polished dark stone, and at its center rose a dais, 3 steps up to an elevated seat that didn't look like a throne in the human sense. No ostentation, no excess. Just a place designed so that anyone standing before it would feel the geometry of power. The figure on the dais didn't rise when I entered. She watched me, not like a predator watches prey, not like a ruler watches a supplicant, like someone watching a door that hadn't been opened in years finally swing inward. Her armor was ceremonial, but it wasn't decorative. It had edges that could cut, joints that could move, plates that had survived real battles. A crest rose along the side of her helm, subtly engraved with symbols that caught the light. Her attendants stood behind her in a semicircle. Her guards waited at the edges of the room, hands resting near weapons that remained politely holstered. The hush deepened. Then she spoke, and the voice struck something in me that I hadn't known was still exposed. "Do you remember me, human?" It wasn't anger. It wasn't accusation. It was a question asked by someone who already knew the answer. I lifted my chin. "I remember a canyon, a shuttle wreck, a lot of people bleeding." A faint shift passed through the room like air moving over a blade. Her helm retracted with a soft hiss. The face beneath was older than my memory, but undeniably the same angular features, dark eyes with a strange reflective sheen, a mouth that seemed built for stern decisions. A thin, pale scar traced from her temple down toward her cheekbone, a line that hadn't been there before. "I remember your hands," she said quietly. They did not tremble. "My hands were full," I replied, keeping my voice even. "I was trying not to die." For a heartbeat, her expression softened just a fraction, like a crack in stone. "You do remember," she said again, and this time it sounded like relief disguised as formality. The air tightened around my ribs. "You weren't a queen then," I said, because it felt safer to put words between us. "Just injured, same as everyone else." "I was heir," she corrected. "Not yet crowned, not yet." Burdened, Her gaze held mine without flinching. There was steel there, but also something else, a curiosity that made me uneasy. I'd seen that look before on commanders studying maps, deciding which towns would become acceptable sacrifices. "You lived because I chose to see a person," I said. "That's it." A ripple of murmurs among the attendants. The word person landed like a stone dropped into still water. Their culture didn't use that word the way ours did, not lightly. The Queen's fingers curled once around the edge of her armrest. "You did not save me for a reward. I didn't save you for anything." "I know," she said, "and that is precisely why the debt cannot be repaid with gold." She rose then, not abruptly, not for show, but because the moment required it. When she stepped down from the dais, the room shifted with her, everyone recalibrating like compasses near a magnet. She stopped a few paces away, close enough that I could see the subtle texture of her skin, the faint shimmer along her throat where a human would have a pulse point. "Do you understand," she asked, voice lowering, "what it means for my people that I came myself to receive you?" I swallowed. "It means you're either very brave or very desperate," she finished, and there it was, a near smile sharp as a splinter. Silence stretched between us. Then she asked the question that made the palace feel suddenly too small. "So tell me, human, what exactly do you want for saving my life?" Every story I'd ever heard about this kind of moment tried to convince you there was a clever answer. A single wish, a perfect demand, but I wasn't in a story. I was in the aftermath of a war that left entire ridgelines scorched and whole communities speaking in new kinds of grief. What did I want? I wanted my friends back. I wanted the nightmares to stop. I wanted people to stop calling a ceasefire peace just because they were tired of counting the dead. But none of those things were possible, so I said the only honest thing I could. "I didn't come here to ask for a crown or a fortress or a ship," I said. "I came because you called, because I want to know why." The Queen studied me. I could feel the attention of every guard, every attendant, every political mind in the room measuring my posture, my tone, deciding whether I was threat or tool. At last she nodded, slow and precise. "Then walk with me." Her attendants shifted in surprise. A guard took a half step forward, then stopped when she lifted a hand. We left the throne chamber through a side corridor away from the ceremonial path. The hall narrowed, the light softened, the air grew cooler. "This way is not shown to visitors," the Queen said, as if offering a confession. "Good," I replied. "I'm not a visitor." That earned me a brief glance, an acknowledgement almost. We emerged onto a terrace overlooking the city below. From up here, the streets looked like threads woven between stone buildings and gardens of tall, silver-leafed plants. Water channels glinted. People moved in patterns that suggested routine and order. Beyond the city rose a sprawling ridge line of jagged rock, and past that, desert that stretched like a held breath. The Queen leaned on the balustrade. "When I was heir," she said, "I believed the war would make us stronger. It was a common belief." "I've heard the same speech in 10 different human accents," I said, her lips pressed together. "Then perhaps we share more than hatred." I didn't answer. She turned her head slightly. "On the day you saved me, my escort was destroyed. I was trapped beneath wreckage with a fractured leg and a punctured lung. My comms were dead. My weapon was out of reach. I could not crawl. I could not fight." "I remember," I said. The image of her armor wedged under metal flashed in my mind. The smell of burning insulation, the way she'd tried to shove my hands away until she realized I wasn't there to finish her off. "You could have left me," she continued. You were outnumbered, your own soldiers were retreating, the canyon was collapsing, and yet you returned. You cut through wreckage with your bare hands, you sealed my wound with whatever you had. I used field tape, I muttered. You used mercy, she corrected, and her voice sharpened, not with anger but intensity. And for years that act has followed me like a shadow, in council chambers, in negotiations, in the quiet moments when I am alone. I felt something twist uncomfortably inside me. You called me here to thank me. No, she said and turned fully to face me now. I called you because my throne is unstable. The confession hit harder than any insult. The queen continued, as if ripping the words out quickly would make them less dangerous. There are factions within my court who believe the ceasefire is weakness. They see humans as a plague that will spread unless burned out. They whisper that my willingness to speak with your governments proves I am unfit. And you think dragging a human veteran into your palace helps? I asked. I think, she said carefully, that the story of a human saving the air has become inconvenient. It undermines the narrative of your kind as mindless beasts. It undermines the narrative of my people as incapable of compassion. It creates questions. So you want to control the questions. I want to survive them, she replied. A breeze moved across the terrace, warm and dry. Below us, the city continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the knife-edge politics above. I didn't ask to be your symbol, I said. No, she agreed, and the sincerity in it unsettled me. But you became one anyway, a living contradiction. I leaned on the stone railing, trying to steady my thoughts. So what's the plan? You parade me around, tell your people the queen owes her life to a human and now everyone should be friends. Her eyes narrowed with something that might have been humor. If it were that simple, I would have done it already. She gestured toward the palace behind us. There will be a gathering tonight, council members, military leaders, the old bloodlines. They will watch you. They will listen to you. Some will attempt to provoke you. And some will attempt to kill me, I said, not as a question. The queen's expression didn't change. Yes, my mouth went dry. You could have put that in the invitation. If you had known, she said, you might have refused, and I needed you here. I stared at her, anger flaring. So I'm bait. No, she said, and the word cracked like a whip. You are proof and leverage, and if you choose it, a voice that can shift what is possible. I let out a slow breath. That's a lot to hang on a medic. For the first time, her composure faltered, just a flicker. It is a lot to hang on anyone, she admitted. That is why I came myself to ask. We stood there in the sunlight, two survivors in a place built for rulers. Finally, she said, softer, tell me what you want, human, not as payment, as truth. I thought of the canyon again, not of saving her, of everyone I couldn't save. Friends, enemies, strangers. The war didn't discriminate once it started chewing. I want the prisoners released, I said, her eyes sharpened. Which prisoners? The ones held since the last offensive, I replied. The ones neither side wants to talk about because they're inconvenient. Your camps, our camps, the people who disappeared into paperwork. The queen went still. I added because the words were already burning their way out. I want a corridor for medical aid across the border zones, not when it's politically convenient, always. If someone's bleeding, they get treated. And in exchange, she said slowly, you will stand in my council hall and speak these demands. I'll stand, I said. I'll speak, but I'm not threatening anyone. I'm not begging either. A faint approval touched her face, dangerous, private. You are difficult, she murmured, almost to herself. I've been called worse, she straightened. Then tonight you will be under my protection. And if your protection fails, I asked, her gaze locked on mine. then my throne does not deserve to remain. That was the closest thing to a vow I'd heard in years. Night in the palace felt like stepping into a different world. The glass canopy above the main hall dimmed to reveal the stars, sharp, cold points. Lanterns filled the chamber with pale light. The air smelled of spice and stone. The council gathered in tiers, dozens of figures in ceremonial armor, their crests and sashes marking lineage and rank. Some looked openly curious. Some looked amused, as if a human in their hall was a novelty. Others looked at me with the flat hunger of people who wanted the past back the way it had been, simple, brutal, certain. The queen sat at the center, calm as carved rock. I stood where she indicated, alone, on a circle of darker stone in the middle of the floor. No podium, no barrier, no place to hide. A counselor rose, an elder with a voice like sandpaper. "So this is the human," he said, not bothering to mask contempt. "The one who claims to have spared our queen." "I didn't spare her," I said. "I treated her." A murmur ran through the tiers. Another counselor, younger, leaned forward. "You expect us to believe you saved her out of compassion." "I didn't have time for philosophy," I replied. "Someone was dying, I stopped it, that's all." Laughter, sharp, dismissive, from a cluster near the top. The elder's eyes narrowed. "And now you come to demand what? Honor, land, a position among us." I glanced at the queen. She didn't move, didn't rescue me. This was the point, speak or be swallowed. "I want prisoners released," I said, voice echoing in the chamber. "From both sides, I want an aid corridor through the border zones, permanent, unconditional, treat the wounded, exchange the sick, identify the dead." A hush fell. Even the mockers quieted, not out of respect, but surprise. The elder's face tightened. "You come here and make demands of a throne not your own." "I'm not demanding," I said. "I'm asking if you want this war to end or if you just want to pause it until you're ready to start again." The air in the hall became thin. Someone stood abruptly near the right tier. A figure in ceremonial armor, crest angled like a blade. He pointed at me. "You speak as if you are equal, as if your kind didn't poison our skies, burn our outposts, butcher our—" And then it happened so fast my mind barely caught up. A movement in the crowd, a glint too sharp, too deliberate, a weapon. I saw the queen's head turn. I saw her hand lift, but the shot was already on its way. Instinct took over, the same instinct that had moved my body in the canyon when I'd heard a cry behind me and turned back into the fire. I dove. The world cracked with sound. Something slammed into the stone where I'd been standing. Chips of black rock erupted like shrapnel. Guards surged. The hall exploded into motion, shouts, armor scraping, bodies colliding. I hit the floor hard, breath knocked out of me. For a moment I tasted blood and thought, absurdly, of field tape. Then the queen's voice rang through the chaos, cold enough to freeze it. "Stop!" The word cut the hall open. Silence followed, not immediate but inevitable. Guards held their positions. Counselors froze mid-step. The would-be assassin, now restrained by two armored soldiers, thrashed like an animal caught in a snare. The queen rose from her seat. She descended the steps slowly, each footfall measured, her gaze fixed on the captive. "This," she said, voice clear, "is what my opponents offer my people, not strength, not honor, only fear, only the old hunger for blood." The captive spat something in a Kiri. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the venom. The queen didn't flinch. She turned, sweeping her gaze across the council. "You have witnessed," she continued. "The humans stand alone in our hall and ask not for power, but for mercy. You have witnessed an attempt to answer that mercy with murder." Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat, something unspoken passing between us. Then she faced the council again. "I will authorize an exchange," she said. "Prisoners, aid, identification of the dead, immediate negotiations to establish a corridor." A rumble of dissent rose, then faltered under the weight of her authority and the exposed treachery. "And any who move against this," she added, voice hardening, "move against my crown." The hall held its breath. The elder counselor's face worked, calculations colliding with pride. At last he bowed stiffly, reluctantly. "As the throne commands," he said. "It wasn't agreement, it was survival." The queen turned to me when it was done. "You threw yourself aside," she said, almost softly, "even when you were not required to." I pushed myself up, dust on my palms, heart still punching against my ribs. "Reflex." "A reflex," she said. "That saved you." I couldn't help it. Something bitter slipped into my voice. "Maybe, or maybe it just delayed the next attempt." The queen's mouth curved faintly, not a smile, but an acknowledgement of reality. "Then you will remain under my protection until you depart." I looked at the council, faces unreadable, eyes sharp, 1,000 private agendas shifting. Then I looked back at her. "Why do you really want this?" I asked quietly. "Peace isn't a corridor, it's a choice, and choices have consequences." The queen's gaze didn't waver. "Because I have ruled through consequence," she said, "and it has not made us safe, it has only made us tired." A pause. "And because," she added, voice lowering so only I could hear, "I remember your hands. They did not tremble, not when you treated an enemy, not when you could have run. That kind of steadiness is rare. My people need to see it. My enemies need to fear it." I let out a slow breath. "So I'm still a symbol." "Yes," she said, "but now you may choose what the symbol means." For the first time since the summons, something in me loosened, not relief, not happiness, but a small space where possibility could exist. I nodded once. "Then let it mean this," I said. "If someone's bleeding, you stop it, even if they're supposed to be your enemy." The queen held my gaze. Something quiet passed between us. An understanding forged in a canyon years ago, now dragged into a palace and forced to stand upright under starlight. "Very well," she said. Then, with the whole council watching, she did something no one expected. She inclined her head, just slightly but unmistakably, to a human medic. And in that small motion, the room changed, not into peace, not into friendship, but into something that could, with effort, become less deadly than what came before. As the guards led the assassin away and the council broke into urgent, furious whispers, the queen stepped closer. "Do you still believe," she asked softly, "that you saved me only because I was bleeding?" I thought of the canyon. I thought of the way her eyes had refused to beg. I thought of my own hands, steady because shaking would have meant admitting fear. "I think," I said, "I saved you because if I didn't, I wouldn't recognize myself afterward." The queen's expression softened just for a heartbeat. "Then," she said, "perhaps that is how wars truly end, not with treaties, not with victories, but with people deciding who they will be when the fire is over." Outside the glass canopy, the stars burned on, indifferent, ancient. Inside, a debt shifted shape into something else. Not payment, not forgiveness, a beginning.